The searing, malevolent heat of the Mojave was not a temperature. It was a physical presence, a hostile entity that wrapped itself around me and stole the air from my lungs. The humming of the air conditioning, a monotonous comfort that had lulled me into a doze, was gone. When I woke, the silence was absolute and unnerving. It was a terrifying void, an absence of life that amplified the frantic pounding of my heart. My eyes, still heavy with the remnants of a peaceful dream, fluttered open. The car was a cage, a metal tomb. The driver's side door, a silent symbol of departure, was ajar, a final, cruel punctuation to the betrayal. And Sarah, my golden-haired Sarah, was gone. My walker, the very thing that tethered me to my independence, my one defense against this world of harsh terrain and unforgiving sun, was gone too. A cold dread, sharper than any I had ever known, sliced through me. I was 72 years old, with a frail body and a heart that felt a sudden, crushing weight. I was in the middle of nowhere, and the golden-haired girl I had raised had left me to die. As my eyes adjusted to the blinding glare, I saw it. A single black object on the dusty ground just a few feet away. It was my worn leather-bound Bible, a physical embodiment of a lifetime of faith, lying abandoned on the unforgiving sand. It wasn't just an object, it was a taunt, a cruel, perfect irony. It lay open to the Book of Psalms, a final, chilling whisper of my granddaughter's intent. "You will need this," she seemed to be saying, "where you are going." In that devastating moment, I knew this wasn't an accident. This was a deliberate act of abandonment, a calculated betrayal orchestrated by my own flesh and blood. My heart pounded a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs as I looked at the endless, desolate expanse of the Mojave, a panorama of sand, scrub brush, and jagged rock formations that looked like the ancient bones of a forgotten world. This was a place of finality, of death, where the sun bleached away all color and hope. But in the agony of that moment, as the wave of despair threatened to consume me, a quiet, but fierce voice in my soul began to whisper. It was a voice I had known my entire life. A voice that had guided me through the valleys of grief and loss. A voice that was both my own and something infinitely greater. It told me my survival was not a matter of chance, but of grace. I was a witness to my own attempted murder, and with a chilling clarity that transcended my terror, I knew my faith had already set a divine plan in motion, a plan that would ensure the truth was revealed and justice, in its most poetic and brutal form, would prevail. I was terrified, yes, but I was not defeated. I was alive, and I was not alone. Before we continue, make sure you follow our page so you don't miss our next true stories, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Your support helps us share these messages with more people who need hope. My name is Eleanor. The world sees a frail, elderly woman, but my story, like all lives, is built on a foundation of love and loss. My late husband, Arthur, was the cornerstone of my existence, a man whose legacy was not measured in dollars, but in the unwavering honesty of his work and the boundless generosity of his spirit. He had a final, peculiar wish after his passing. He had meticulously crafted a trust, a significant inheritance intended for our granddaughter, Sarah, to be used for her college education. It was a sum so vast it could rewrite her future, a gift born of a grandfather's enduring love. But Arthur, a man of profound intuition, had included a single, firm request in his will, a clause that seemed bizarre to all but me. The inheritance was to be released only after the final passing of his wife me. He never spoke of it to Sarah, only to our lawyer, his face etched with a quiet, knowing sadness. He believed this safeguard would ensure I was always cared for, that my well-being would be a sacred trust, a final promise that his wife would be safe and cherished until my final days. To me, it was a beautiful testament to his love. To Sarah, it was a grotesque and insurmountable obstacle. To her, the inheritance was not a gift, but a life-changing sum of money, a key to a future she believed was her divine right, a passport to a life of privilege and ease, free from the crushing weight of student loans and the long, arduous journey of honest work. Sarah was a beautiful, brilliant young woman, but she was a stranger to her grandfather's values. She believed in shortcuts, in instant gratification, driven by an insatiable, consuming hunger for wealth that had no patience for the slow, steady accumulation of a life well lived. She had a grand plan, a dazzling vision of a future built on luxury and prestige. She was going to get into the most prestigious college in the country, a school where a student debt-free future was a given, and she saw the scholarship money as her ticket. But I was in the way, a living, breathing barrier to her future. She was fixated on a life she saw on Instagram and a career in real estate investment, constantly checking property values on Zillow and tracking stocks on her Robinhood app. The change in her was so subtle at first, I barely noticed it. Her eyes, which had once sparkled with the unadulterated love of a child, now held a cold, calculating glint whenever she came to visit. Her conversation, once filled with stories of her friends and her dreams, became a relentless, unnerving interrogation. She would talk about her future with a desperate, frantic energy, her voice a thin veneer of forced cheerfulness as she spoke of her desperate plans and her desire to leave everything behind and build a new, more glamorous life. She would ask me about my health with a forced casualness that never fooled me, a casualness that betrayed an unspoken, predatory curiosity. "Grandma," she would begin, her voice sweet as honey and sharp as a knife, "you know, a place like this, it's a gold mine. You could sell it, and you'd have all the money you'd ever need." Her words were a thinly veiled threat, a chilling plea wrapped in manipulation, a test to see if I would succumb to her twisted desires. The wall of resentment between us grew taller, thicker, and colder with every visit, a tangible barrier that had replaced the warmth of a grandmother-granddaughter relationship. I was so naive, so blinded by my love for her, that I could not see her for what she had become. I had no idea that her greed had transformed her into a predator, that she was already plotting my end, and that the foundation of a lifetime of trust was about to crumble in a horrifying, cold-blooded display of treachery. I simply believed she was a child with big dreams, not a monster in the making. The plan was not simple. It was a masterpiece of malevolent planning, a blueprint of betrayal drawn with a cold, ruthless logic. Sarah had meticulously planned every detail, treating my demise not as an act of murder, but as a final, brutal business transaction. She believed she was simply clearing an unfortunate but necessary debt, an obstacle to her grand future. She had spent months studying my routine, my weaknesses, and the vast, empty expanse of the desert that she considered her blank canvas. She had even researched the local climate, discovering that the Mojave's summer temperatures, which could reach upwards of 120 degrees Fahrenheit, were a far more efficient and untraceable weapon than any poison or firearm. It would look like a tragic accident, a sudden stroke or heat exhaustion. And who would ever question a dutiful granddaughter taking her elderly grandmother on a final trip? She had her story memorized, her tears rehearsed, a perfect performance ready for the day she returned alone. The trip itself was her cruelest deception, a carefully orchestrated illusion of a final, loving gesture. She had convinced me to go for a trip, a last hurrah before she left for college, promising a surprise picnic in a beautiful, secluded spot. The car ride was a study in contradictions. The air conditioning hummed, a low, constant murmur that provided a cool, comforting sanctuary from the brutal sun outside. My granddaughter, her profile a picture of serene innocence, kept her gaze fixed on the road, her hands gripping the steering wheel as if she were in a race against time. I, in my naive bliss, simply saw a young woman excited for her future. I chattered on about her grandfather's trust, about my hopes for her college career, and about how proud he would have been to see her pursue her dreams. Sarah's responses were clipped, a string of monosyllabic answers that should have been a warning sign, but I was too blinded by my own love to see them. She was a perfect actress, completely convinced of her own righteousness. She saw herself not as a murderer, but as a pioneer, a woman breaking free from the suffocating chains of the past. She didn't consider the human cost, the pain, the betrayal. She only saw the end result. A clean, blank slate and a fortune she would use to build her new life. On her iPhone, she used Google Maps to meticulously plot the remote location, and her Google search history would later reveal extensive queries for desert survival, undetermined death, and how to get out of a real estate contract. When we arrived, she made up a story, a lie about a surprise picnic spot she wanted to show me, her voice as sweet as the poisoned honey she was offering. She had chosen the location with the precision of a cartographer mapping out a treacherous course, a spot so remote that the only sound was the distant howl of the wind. The landscape was a desolate, empty expanse of sun-bleached sand, punctuated by jagged rock formations and a few skeletal, sun-scorched trees that looked like ancient bones rising from the earth. There was no shade, no water, no sign of human life for miles. She had helped me out of the car, her touch firm and a little too quick, as if she couldn't bear to be near me for a second longer than she had to. And then, as I bent down to pick up my Bible, a final, beautiful gift that she had placed by the car door, she slipped away. The sound of the car door closing was a cold, final punctuation to the betrayal, the sound of a coffin lid being sealed. I watched as her Tesla, a silver speck on the horizon, sped away, the trail of dust it kicked up a final, desolate message of my abandonment. She left me alone, without my walker, my phone, or any way to get help. She drove away, believing I would simply perish in the heat, that my passing would look like a tragic accident, a terrible mishap that would free her from the burden of my love and the obstacle to her inheritance. She had a script memorized, a story of an unfortunate misstep, a tragic accident, a devastating loss. She was a perfect actress, completely convinced of her own righteousness. She didn't consider the human cost, the pain, the betrayal. She only saw the end result. A clean, blank slate and a fortune she would use to build her new life. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, a tiny flicker of movement on the horizon caught my eye. It was a man, a solitary figure hiking through the desert. He was an unassuming man, with a weathered face and a quiet strength. He was a former missionary, a man who had spent his life walking in faith and obedience to a higher power. He later told me he felt a strange, inexplicable pull, a feeling of unease, a deep, unshakable certainty that he was not alone. His mind, trained for logic and quick decision-making, screamed for him to ignore the feeling and follow his route, but a sense of absolute, unshakable certainty compelled him to obey this unexplainable guidance. He couldn't articulate why he was moving, only that he had to. A powerful, unseen force guided his steps as he rounded a small hill, away from his planned route. The heat, which was oppressive just moments before, seemed to dissipate on this side of the hill, replaced by a strange, unnatural coolness. The thick, black smoke that filled the air everywhere else seemed to part for him, creating a narrow, clear path that defied all logic. He found himself standing before a single, open car door, and behind it, a faint, pure, comforting golden light emanated. It was a light he had never seen before. It was not the orange glow of fire, nor the stark white of an electric bulb. It pulsed with a life and warmth that had nothing to do with the inferno consuming the house. He thought it was an impossible reflection, a trick of the flames, a manifestation of his own desperation, but something inside him knew it was real. At that same moment, a voice in my mind, as clear as a bell, told me to go to that car. I obeyed, and when I arrived I saw the light. It was emanating not from a fixture, but from the very air itself, a shimmering, pulsating beacon that filled me with an overwhelming sense of peace. The unbearable heat was replaced by a gentle, temperate breeze. I was completely calm, an island of peace in the middle of a raging storm, my heart beating with a quiet certainty that I was not alone. The voice that had woken me returned, a soft, encouraging whisper that told me to stay put, that help was on the way. I wasn't just safe, I was being watched over, guided by an invisible hand. He found me there, unharmed and completely calm. He later said my eyes were glowing with a light that had nothing to do with the sun. He led me through a narrow, smoke-free passage I had never known existed, a path that led to a safe and clear escape. Moments after we exited the car, the engine collapsed in a thunderous roar, a final, poetic punctuation to the betrayal. The timing was impossibly perfect, a testament to the fact that this was not a rescue by chance, but a divinely ordained miracle. He himself would later admit that I wasn't saved by his skill, but by an unseen force that guided him to the one place in the desert where I was protected. The police investigation was swift and merciless, a cold and methodical process that moved in stark contrast to the frantic chaos of the blaze. The minute they arrived on the scene, a finely tuned instrument of detection was brought in. Its nose, more sensitive than any human could comprehend, went straight to the old electrical panel and the living room drapes, the very spots where Marcus had doused the accelerant. The investigators then began their meticulous search, their trained eyes picking up on telltale signs. They found the distinct, V-shaped burn patterns on the floorboards, a classic sign of a deliberate, pour-and-burn fire. The forensic report, a cold, hard document filled with undeniable facts, confirmed everything. The fire was a premeditated act, not an accident. The crime scene investigation was thorough, leaving no doubt of a pre-planned criminal act. Meanwhile, a panicked Marcus, believing he had to put on a show of grief and concern, had driven back to the scene. He parked his car a few blocks away and walked back, his face a mask of feigned shock and sorrow. He intended to help the firefighters, to play the role of the devoted son whose world had been tragically shattered. He was so focused on his act that he failed to notice the subtle, lingering scent of gasoline on his own clothing. He came too close to the wreckage, drawn in by a morbid curiosity to see the destruction he had caused. A single, rogue ember, a tiny, glowing particle of wood, drifted through the still air and landed on the cuff of his pants. It was a spark of divine retribution, a small, insignificant thing that sealed his fate. The gasoline-soaked fibers ignited instantly, not with a gentle sizzle, but with a sudden, violent whoosh of flame that consumed his clothing in a terrifying flash. The flames wrapped around his legs and lower body, a fiery embrace of his own making. The help he intended to offer turned into a desperate, agonizing scream as he became an unwitting victim of his own fire. He was pulled from the wreckage, screaming a terrible irony. The fire that was meant to be his deliverance became his own damnation. He was rushed to the hospital with severe third-degree burns. He was not killed, but his injuries were a living hell. The physical pain was a constant, searing agony that no amount of medication could fully dull. His legs and lower body were scorched, his skin a roadmap of his greed. He would be in and out of the hospital for months, undergoing countless skin grafts and surgeries, a testament to his own depravity. But the physical torment was nothing compared to the emotional and spiritual agony. He was a prisoner in his own body, confined to a bed, his once coveted freedom now an impossible dream. The insurance company, upon discovering the arson and the fraudulent claim, refused to pay. Marcus, a man who had sought to get rich quick, was now a burn victim, ridden to bed forever, his body and spirit broken by his own greed. The medical bills, a staggering, ever-growing mountain of medical debt, were his true inheritance, a cruel and perfect poetic justice. He could no longer afford a criminal defense attorney. I found myself without a home, but with my life and my faith more powerful than ever. The days that followed were a blur of police questioning, a gentle stay at a friend's house, and the quiet, humbling realization that I had survived something truly monstrous. But even in my exhaustion, I knew my journey wasn't over. A few days after my release from the hospital, I went to visit Marcus. The air in his hospital room was thick with the scent of antiseptic and regret. He was a shell of the man he once was, his face a mask of pain and shame, his eyes hollowed out by the sheer weight of what he had done. His once smooth skin was now a patchwork of angry red and raw, weeping flesh, a grotesque and permanent testament to his folly. The bandages on his legs were a stark, white contrast to the dark reality of his crime. He didn't look up when I entered, but I saw his body flinch, as if my very presence was a physical torment. I pulled up a chair and sat in the silence for a long time, the only sound the steady beep of his heart monitor. Finally I spoke, my voice gentle. "Marcus," I said, "I'm here." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and I saw a tidal wave of emotion, fear, pain, and a raw, unadulterated shame. "Mom," he choked out, his voice hoarse, "I'm so sorry. I don't know why I did it. I was so lost, so buried in debt. I was so foolish." The words were a torrent of confession, an unburdening of a soul that had been holding a terrible secret for too long. He wept, not with the dry, heaving sobs of a man trying to be strong, but with the broken, guttural cries of a little boy who had made a terrible mistake. He tried to reach for me, but his hands were too weak, trembling with pain and the aftershocks of his burns. I didn't condemn him. I didn't scold him. I just sat with him, my hand resting on the edge of his bed, offering a silent, unconditional love that transcended his monstrous betrayal. I knew his suffering was its own punishment, a divine justice that had found him in the most brutal and poetic way. I did not need to condemn him. His life was a living hell of his own making, And the debt he owed was not to me, but to his own conscience. In the weeks and months that followed, I began my own journey of forgiveness. It was not a single grand moment, but a daily profound act of choice. I sold the land where our house once stood, a parcel of earth that held both my most cherished memories and my most horrific nightmare. I didn't take a massive profit. Instead, I took what I needed to build a small, modest home for myself, and the rest of the money, a significant sum, I used to establish the Arthur and Ruth Foundation, a charity dedicated to helping young people understand the dangers of greed and the importance of hard work. The foundation would provide scholarships and mentorships to young people who were struggling with the same temptations that had consumed my son. It was my way of taking the ashes of our past and building a new legacy, one that was not based on wealth, but on grace, humility, and the profound power of a second chance. Marcus, meanwhile, was left to face the consequences of his actions. His debt was staggering, a mountain of medical bills that would never be paid off. His life, once so full of empty promises, was now a testament to the devastating consequences of choosing evil. His physical healing was a slow, painful process, marked by daily agony and the gradual acceptance of a life forever altered. He would never walk again without assistance. He would never again chase a get-rich-quick scheme. He was tethered to his bed, a constant, living reminder of his own depravity. I visit him still, not out of obligation, but out of a deep and abiding sense of compassion. I am his only family, his only hope, and his only connection to the world outside his hospital room. The boy I had loved and raised was now a broken man, a victim of his own greed. And I, the intended victim, was now his only hope, his final link to a world he had tried to burn down. The fire of greed will consume all who let it burn, leaving nothing but ruin and regret. It is a slow, insidious burn that starts as a flicker of desire and grows into an all-consuming inferno, charring a soul from the inside out and turning a person into a hollow shell of their former self. But God's grace, like a beacon in the darkest storm, will always guide the innocent to safety. It is not an abstract concept but a living force, an unseen hand that can nudge a rescuer away from danger and toward the very point of salvation. My survival was not a coincidence. It was a testament to the fact that some things are not meant to be taken, and some legacies are more valuable than any sum of money. The most precious inheritance is not what you gain, but what you preserve through faith and love. The quiet resilience of a soul that has been tested and not found wanting, the unbreakable bond of family, and the profound, humbling truth that even in the face of the darkest betrayal, there is still hope. This is the true treasure, the legacy my husband left me, and the one I will now pass on to others. My story is a painful but powerful warning. A life built on greed is a house built on sand, ready to collapse at the slightest tremor. But a life built on faith, love, and grace is a fortress, unassailable against even the most destructive flames. If this story has resonated with you, if you have faced your own fires of betrayal or loss, I pray you will take a moment to reflect on your own journey. Recognize the unseen hand that has guided you. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us share these messages of hope and resilience with more people who are searching for their own beacon of light in the darkness. Thank you, and may God bless you in your darkest moments and beyond.